Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Combo Couch. I'm Fiorella Isabel, and I have the pleasure of having a very wonderful a person that I'm hoping to learn a lot from and hear from. And I wanted to have this interview for a while, but it's actually very poignant right now. We're seeing many attacks coming from Israel onto Palestine and onto Gaza. In the last few hours, we've seen so many lives taken, and this is an issue that, for me, is a personal one as I stand against the occupation of Israel on Palestine, and the way this is largely covered across all media is, in my opinion, not fair. It is, in my opinion, an attempt to whitewash the crimes of the Israeli settler occupation. And I say that as a journalist that really seeks to see the least bias on all things. There are certain truths that exist that really cannot be looked on any other way but as they are. And in certain circumstances, there are oppressors and the oppressed. And this is why I have the pleasure today of having Nkosi Mandela, grandson of the great Nelson Mandela, also a member of the South African National Assembly of the ANC political party. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the Palestinian Community Network for making this possible. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here and invited for this interview. Good morning to you all.
Yes, and well, my audience is primarily Western, but there is largely a lot of support for the Palestinian community. And I wanted to start off by reminding everybody that we're going through the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, where, I mean, at least 750,000 of Palestinians were removed by Israel. This was, of course, a historic thing that happened. But in recent years, there has been an attempt to whitewash what actually happened. And of course, Israel, which many say is an occupation, which is an apartheid occupation that has been pretty much imposing its own will, and at the dismay, at the behest of many Palestinians who have, of course, been resisting throughout all this time. Israel has been committing, most recently, many more bombings and many more attacks on the Palestinian community. And these international crimes are recognized across the world. This is something that the so-called international community knows is occurring. Now, recently, they've upped their ante in Iran, Syria, and of course, Palestine. So I wanted to ask you, Nkosi, or Chief Mandela, as many call you, why is this so important, given your background in the history of apartheid in South Africa? Why is the Palestinian fight for their right to return so vital?
Thank you. And first and foremost, we as South Africa know what it is to live under oppression and live under apartheid. We come from a brutal past of 350 years of colonialism, coupled with 60 years of apartheid brutality from apartheid South Africa. And therefore, ours was a struggle for liberation that was fought on many fronts. We had an internal resistance within the borders of South Africa, where we were able to unite our people to fight against the oppressors. Secondly, it was from our frontline states, our neighboring countries, that gave their full support to our cause. Thirdly, it's the support that we not only enjoyed from the African continent, but from the global community as well. As you would have known that we had the entire international solidarity movement rally behind the anti-apartheid campaign, as well as the Free Mandela campaign, which looked to fight for the release of all political prisoners. And in this regard, we were able to attain and achieve our freedom in 1994. In this regard, Madiba then went on a global campaign, thanking all that stood side by side with us during our darkest days. And he spoke very highly of the Palestinian people who stood side by side with us during our struggle for liberation. They were an inspiration to my grandfather, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, while they were in prison and they would hear of news of the Palestinians fighting against a brutal regime only with stones. And this Palestinian bravery encouraged them and gave them hope that they would attain their freedom in their lifetime. And it was in 1995 on his visit to Gaza that President Mandela committed to the Palestinians by saying that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And therefore, we as this current generation in South Africa have picked up the baton where the founding father of our democracy left. And we have become advocates and activists on the ground for the Palestinian cause, but most importantly for oppressed nations around the globe. And when it comes to the Palestinians, I had to visit myself in 2017 to witness the atrocities that were experienced on a daily basis by the Palestinians. And it was on that trip that I came to the realization, like many of leaders from South Africa who have been to occupied Palestine and apartheid Israel, who have come back and said that what we were able to see and experience in occupied Palestine is a worse apartheid than we ever experienced as South Africans. And it is in this regard that we are crisscrossing the globe and being the voice of Palestinians who are living in Gaza in the largest open-air prison, that you have 2 million Palestinians that are locked into this open-air prison. And from time to time, when Israel feels like it, will send rocket shells and bombs, bombing innocent children, women, and Palestinian youth. We therefore cannot be complacent and be silent during such atrocities. And this is why I've decided to embark on a global tour where we will be going to the United States of America on the invitation of the US Palestine Community Network. And we will be sharing our own experiences, South Africans, and the parallels we can draw in what we are seeing in Palestine.
Yes, it's very important to make that connection because so many people say what's going on in Palestine and occupied Palestine is not apartheid. So many people say that it's not that, it's something else. And of course there is solidarity in that connection it's under unfortunate circumstances, obviously, but there definitely has to be, because one would be hypocritical to call one apartheid and not the other. There are so many political things that have gotten in the way of many in the international community recognizing that what's going on in Palestine is an occupation by Israel, and that it is an apartheid occupation, as you mentioned, an open air prison. One of the reasons this has happened is because so much time has passed, and now the argument from certain so-called progressive and even leftist organizations and groups say, well, there's no solution to this conflict other than a two-state solution. They say that BDS is just not foreseeable. They say that it's just not going to work. Israel has a right to exist. These are the things they say. And that, right now, the best solution would be to have a two-state solution. let me ask you this. How could a two-state solution work if it's apartheid? Isn't the issue of apartheid the fact that you can't live with apartheid? You can't live with somebody deeming a group of people less than to exist. So how could a two-state solution possibly work?
I will start by saying that this two-state solution was an opportunity that has come and gone. That ship sailed a long time ago. While we were speaking about the Oslo Accord, we could have discussed the two-state solution. And in this regard, even the Palestinians themselves asked President Mandela to be a champion for a two-state solution where they could at least get back their territories as per the borders of 1967. If you look at apartheid, South Africa was born in 1948 with the rise of the Nationalist Party. At the very same time when the apartheid Zionist regime was born in occupied Palestine. And since then, they have eroded the land of Palestinians. These must be understood as settler colonialists that came from all parts of the world to settle on Palestinian lands, where there was only one Palestine in the past. And having arrived in 1948 through the catastrophe as Nakba that we know it today, they were able to evacuate over 3.5 million Palestinians and force them into the diaspora and into exile. Today, you have almost 7 million Palestinians living in the diaspora. And the settler colonialists have never stopped from day one. They have illegally evacuated Palestinians off their land, off their villages, disregarding international law. There has been resolutions under the United Nations that compel them to no longer advance further on Palestinian lands, but they do it on a daily. We have been witnessing this in Silwan, in Hebron, in Jerusalem, and right across villages of occupied Palestine. And we are happy today that institutions such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have now come to class Israel as an apartheid state. We have for many years been advocating as activists on the ground that apartheid Israel should be seen as such and classified as such because it is an apartheid state. You have only to go to occupied Palestine to see for yourselves that there are a set of rules and legislation in place for Zionists in apartheid Israel. And there are a set of rules that only apply to Palestinians. And Palestinians are regarded as second-class citizens in the land of their birth and the land of their forefathers. And this is why we have called apartheid Israel as an apartheid state. And they ran away from such description because they understood that we have classed apartheid as a crime against humanity. And what we are seeing is not only just a crime against humanity. The Netanyahu regime is advocating and carrying out ethnic cleansing and genocide. In 1990 in Rwanda, when we witnessed the Hutus and the Tutsis, we all as the global community were able to rush in and compel them to bring about peace. And today there is peace that is realized in Rwanda. We are failing the Palestinians by being able to class this as an apartheid state and be able to see that they are carrying out ethnic cleansing and a genocide. And for us is that we will continue as activists being the voice for the Palestinian people. And hello,
Did
are
we
you
lose
still
him?
there?
Yes, you're here. We lost you for a second. You're good. I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was done with that question.
Okay.
Unless
Well, yeah,
you want
I
me to
heard.
repeat something.
No. It's so I love that you mentioned Rwanda because that is another example of when the international community came together. But there's so much political just turmoil that gets in the way, right? Especially when it comes to Israel, because we know who backs Israel is majorly the West, primarily led by the United States, which I mean funds Israel to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. This is something that is huge, and of course, politicians are told to not say anything about Israel. They almost have to swear some sort of loyalty. It is the weirdest thing, even as an American, because Israel, in many ways, has a higher standard of living than many people in the United States. They have healthcare. They have other things that the American people don't have. It is the most strange thing, and for many activists in the United States, they consider that this relationship is really to blame for a lot of this. Now, I do want to mention something because I always get thrown this question by so many who are supporters of Israel. This is whenever Palestinians defend themselves, right? The issue of Hamas always comes up. The issue of terrorism and militant terrorist always comes up, right? That these groups are terrorists and that you're being anti-Semitic in any sort of defense. What is your response to that, especially when some Israelis claim that it is anti-Semitic to denounce Zionism?
It's totally laughable when we hear such, because we know that one's terrorist is another one's liberator. In the case of our own struggle for liberation in South Africa, our global icon and founding father of our democracy, President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, was classed as a terrorist by the United States of America. He remained a terrorist during his presidency, and his name was only removed after his presidency in 2003 from the terrorist list of the CIA. We know very well from our own experience that the US administration, wherever they wanted to advocate for white supremacists and to support their apartheid allies in South Africa, they often use this terminology to class the resistance that was led by the majority of our people. We came to be classed as terrorists. So we do not see it any differently for the Palestinians and Palestine. Every political party, whether it be Hamas or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, will be regarded as a terrorist. And you would recall that in our own struggle for liberation, there were many fronts who have been fought on different stages. I've spoken about the fight internally that advocated for an internal resistance within the borders of South Africa, within our frontline states being our neighboring countries, on the African continent, on the global community. And some of our leaders chose to advocate for a peaceful protest, but when the youth in 1976 came through the Soweto uprising. They changed our history for the better, that we had a more militant approach. We were out in protest on all the streets right across the landscape of our country. And the African National Congress, also with the Pan-African Congress, they decided when going to exile that it will be futile for us to continue speaking peace when we are facing a violent and brutal apartheid regime. And we see it no differently for Hamas, for the Palestine Islamic jihadists, or any other Palestinian group that decides to defend its people and defend its territories against an aggressor, that being apartheid Israel. And we must be clear on this, that these are settler colonialists that have come to invade Palestinian lands and on a daily basis are chipping away and taking away Palestinian lands. Whereas this was once a one Palestinian land, Palestinians have now been forced into less than 12% of their original territories. This is the same experience we had as South Africans, where the majority of our people, 87% of the population, was forced into homeland reserves and Bantustans that equated to 13% of the land, and where a 10% of the population enjoyed 87% of the land. And this is why we waged an effective struggle for liberation, which culminated in us attaining our freedom in 1994. And we are saying that as much as the international community was able to stand side by side with us, we can do for the Palestinians like we did for South Africa.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that any opposition to the occupation or any of those in power, like the United States has labeled their counterparts terrorists. For example, Cuba is in that instance, this idea of terrorists is used by those in power to try to dismiss the attacks that are happening in these occupied countries, Palestine being one of them. And we talk about the bombs, but there's also the internal struggle for water, food, medicine, and all of these things that are completely brushed aside. Now, let me ask you this, since we did mention the United States in regard, this is, as I said, the number one funder of Israel, right? Many say that the U.S. is being largely hypocritical. They denounce white supremacy and racism, especially the current administration denouncing white supremacy, racism, say that they fight against it. However, they then export interventions abroad, fund terror regimes like Al-Qaeda, neo-Nazis all over Europe, and of course, Israel. How guilty is a nation like the United States in actually spreading this supremacy abroad?
The United States of America, the biggest hypocrites we've ever come across globally. They speak of peace, they speak of being the oldest democracy in the globe. Yet in many instances, you just have to look at Latin America, you look at Africa, where they've brought about regime change, and they've brought mercenaries to topple elected governments into office. A classic example right now that is unfolding, that we are witnessing, is the removal of a revered head of state in being the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. He's been loved by the vast majority of Pakistanis that support him and champion him. But because he's denouncing the role and the intervention of the United States of America, the US is funding a militant regime to prosecute, to lock up, and to ensure that Imran Khan does not surface in the Pakistani politics. And this is what we've become accustomed to in Africa and anywhere where there's resources like oil that they are interested in. They will go in and fund military to topple the regime. We've seen it in the case of Venezuela, where they've wanted to remove Hugo Chavez until he's passing. The current head of state, His Excellency President Nicolas Maduro, is also been such an example. And we are saying that as the international solidarity movement, we need to speak out against the imperialist regime and the capitalist advocates, and ensure that we create a network that will be so strong that we will be able to speak as one voice. Palestinians in the region and in the Arab world need Africa. Africa needs Europe. Europe needs the United States of America as much as we need Latin America to come and join hands in the international solidarity movement so that we can utilize our numbers to voice our challenges.
And my last question is regarding this international solidarity movement. Recently, there's been a rise of peace in the Middle East with Syria and Saudi Arabia. Also, the visit of Bashar al-Assad into Iran recently has upset the U.S. and Israel. We've definitely seen an attempt to stop the Yemen war, and perhaps a light at the end of this tunnel to it finally ending. We've also seen attempts in Latin America to increase de-dollarization and decrease dependence from the West. And this is something that we're seeing throughout the global South, throughout the Middle East, and Africa as well. We're seeing this sort of rise in Pan-Africanism and an ability to demand national sovereignty, which is what most of these countries want to demand, is national sovereignty. Nobody's saying they hate the United States. They don't ever want to work with the United States, but there's an attempt to build upon cooperation, equity, relationships that are built on mutual respect. Is it possible then, with this rise of seeming multipolarity of sorts, that there is a way, an incentive for this to help build in the end to apartheid and occupation in Palestine?
Well, one of our biggest threats has been the apartheid Israel lobby, not only in the region, that being the Arab League of Nations, but also in the African continent and other parts of the globe. And as activists on the ground, we have been working tirelessly to turn that tide. We have been very happy to witness right here in our very own continent, being Africa, that through the Pan-African Parliament and through the African Union, the Palestinian struggle has been placed high on the agenda, like that of Western Sahara. And therefore, Africans can be able to identify with the struggle of the Palestinians, because we come from the long history of colonialism, coupled with the long history of brutal regimes that came as settler colonialists onto our continent. And having been able to win and achieve our freedom and instill our sovereignty, we have been able to be an advocate for the Palestinian struggle. And where we were seeing a normalization in the Arab world, we became very concerned on that. And some of us were even saying that if the Arab dagger turns its back on Palestinians, Africa will liberate Palestine. And as a result, we've seen also that tide turn. We've seen our Arab League of Nations turning and saying that we must also rally our governments, our people in support of the Palestinian people. But we've also been happy to witness the change in atmosphere where we are now seeing Saudi Arabia in talks with Iran, Saudi Arabia seizing arms and ending their war with Yemen. This is encouraging us to build on unity and ensure that even our brothers and sisters in Latin America and in the Caribbean, we reach out to them and we solidify our South-to-South relations, and we are able to protect our states. But for us as South Africa to sit as one of the BRICS nations and be able to be champions through BRICS of change, we are now seeing the likes of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and UAE wanting to join the BRICS countries. That would effectively tell you that we will be owning and responsible for 46% of the global economy. And it will be interesting to watch as the new world order rises and as we come to hosting the BRICS summit in August in South Africa, what will be unfolding. The BRICS countries are already speaking about a BRICS currency, and you could understand what that will do for countries to be able to trade in their own currencies. So we as South Africa can be able to trade with India in our own currencies and not be compelled to utilize American dollars. And this is a real significant step for countries that have been advocates for change.
Yes, I mean, so many important points. I look forward to what's going to happen in South Africa. BRICS is definitely much larger than the rest of the, the Western Hemisphere, the Garden, the so-called, international community that the West only refers to itself and its friends. But we will see what happens. Thank you so much for coming on and having this discussion. I could talk so much more, but I do want to give you a chance to let everybody know where they can find you, where they can go for tickets at this tour. I know it's mandelatour.com, but if you have anything you'd like to say to the audience, as well as where you're going to be, where you're headed, please go ahead.
Please do look us up on the US-Palestine Community Network through our social media on Twitter, on Instagram. You can be able to pick up where all the events will be taking place. And you can also look me up as Nkosi Zweli-veli-le, that is my handle on Twitter as well as on Instagram, as I will be posting many of the work we will be doing during the tour, and all the upcoming interviews will be put onto our social media. I'm grateful for the interview, and I look forward to seeing you in all the areas that we'll be visiting: Milwaukee, Cleveland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago. I look forward to seeing you all on the Mandela US tour. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And that's a wrap, guys. This is a short interview. I just wanted to bring him on here and talk, and we will be back later on with Pasta to do our regular show. Thanks so much, and combo out. Have a good one, guys.